Strip away everything. No hospital, no pharmacy, no clean tap, no roof that keeps the cold out. It's just you, a landscape that doesn't care whether you live, and a long list of things that would happily end you before nightfall. That was ordinary life for almost the entire run of our species. And the strange part isn't that people died. The strange part is how many lived and what they had to figure out to pull it off. Because they didn't have a lab, they had a body, a problem, and one method. Try it, watch what happens, and if you're still breathing tomorrow, tell everyone you know. That was the whole research program for most of human history. No control group, no ethics board. Just a hungry person deciding to find out whether the thing in front of them was food or a funeral. What they came up with over and over looks unhinged on the surface. Putting insects into an open wound on purpose. Eating a diet with no fruit and no vegetables, and somehow dodging a disease that wiped out ships full of sailors. Brewing a bitter weed into a fever cure that, 16 centuries later, would win somebody a Nobel Prize. Every one of these sounds like a terrible idea. Every one of them worked. And here's the thread I want you to hold on to, because it keeps coming back. Almost every time a later, richer, prouder society looked at this knowledge and called it primitive, they were wrong. And forgetting it cost them. Let's start somewhere sweet. Long before anyone could see a bacterium, people were packing honey into wounds. The Egyptians did it constantly. Their oldest medical scrolls, the ones scholars still read today, reach for honey again and again. On burns, on cuts, on infections that should have turned deadly. Greek and Chinese healers wrote the same instructions on the other side of the world without comparing notes. For a long time, modern doctors filed all of this under charming nonsense, the kind of thing you nod along to when your grandmother says it. Then they looked at what honey does, and the charming nonsense turned out to be chemistry. Honey is a sugar so concentrated that bacteria landing in it get pulled apart by osmosis, the water dragged straight out of their cells. Its pH is low enough to make most microbes miserable, and there's a quiet trick hidden inside it. The bees add an enzyme called glucose oxidase, which slowly releases hydrogen peroxide, the same disinfectant sitting in your bathroom cabinet, except in a steady, low trickle that's gentle on living tissue instead of a harsh splash. A time-release antibiotic, brewed by insects, sitting in a jar. It gets better or worse, depending on how you feel about having doubted your ancestors. Certain honeys kill bacteria our strongest drugs have started to fail against, including MRSA, the resistant staph infection that stalks modern hospitals and kills people who only checked in for a routine operation. Tested against it in the lab, honey keeps working, and it works against a long list of pathogens without the bacteria learning to resist it. So medicine did the only sensible thing. It went back. Today you can buy sterilized, medical-grade honey dressings, one brand cleared by the FDA back in 2007, stocked in wound clinics and used on diabetic ulcers and burns that antibiotics can't close. 5,000 years of old wives' tale, reissued with a barcode. If honey is the gentle way in, let's ruin that. Picture a deep gash, the kind that needs stitches and no thread anywhere in the world. What you do have is a colony of very angry ants. In parts of ancient India, and separately in Africa and the Amazon, healers solved wound closure with living hardware. You take a large soldier ant, hold it so its jaws straddle the two edges of the cut, and let it bite down. Those mandibles clamp shut with real force. Then you pinch off the body. The head stays behind, jaws locked, holding the wound closed like a staple that grew its own grip. And it holds for days, long enough for the skin to start knitting back together. The practice is old enough to appear in some of India's earliest medical texts. It was documented in a Western medical journal as late as the 1920s. Warriors of the Maasai used it on battle wounds, and Greek barbers were reportedly still closing cuts this way at the end of the 1800s. I want to be fair here. Pressing an angry insect into an open wound carries real risk, and this was never spotless surgery. But look at the idea underneath it. The Sanskrit surgical tradition that recorded this, tied to the physician Sushruta, was not a crowd of people flailing in the dark. The same tradition laid out how to rebuild a human nose using a flap of skin swung down from the forehead, a technique so sound that reconstructive surgeons still use a direct descendant of it. These were people thinking hard about how flesh heals and how to hold it in place while it does. When a surgeon fires a modern staple gun to close an incision, they are using the exact principle those ants supplied, minus the ant. Somebody had the concept 2,500 years early. They just reached for the tool the forest handed them. Now let's talk about a disease that terrified explorers, and the people who quietly never got it. Scurvy is what happens when you run out of vitamin C. Your gums rot, old wounds tear back open because your body can no longer hold its own tissue together, your teeth loosen, and eventually you die. For centuries, it was the great killer of long voyages and polar expeditions. European and American crews died of it in staggering numbers well into the 20th century, on ships stocked with plenty of salted meat and hard biscuit. Everyone knew fresh food was the cure. Out on the ice, there was no fresh food, so the men rotted from the inside and died. Except the people already living on that ice weren't dying of it. The Inuit ate a diet that, on paper, should have been a scurvy death sentence. Almost entirely meat and fat, no orchard, no vegetable garden anywhere in sight. And they were fine. For a long time, outsiders couldn't explain it, and some quietly assumed these people were just biologically special. They weren't. The answer was in the food, and in how they ate it. It turns out you don't need much vitamin C to stay clear of scurvy, only around 10 milligrams a day. And fresh animal organs carry it. Raw caribou liver holds a solid dose, roughly what you'd get chasing it in a piece of fruit. Seal brain has some. Whale skin, that prized Arctic staple, has more, and the adrenal glands are loaded with it. The catch is the word raw. Vitamin C falls apart with heat and with time, which is exactly why the explorers, boiling and salting everything for the voyage, destroyed the little their provisions held, while the Inuit, eating organs fresh and often uncooked, kept theirs intact. This wasn't luck. It was a nutritional strategy sharpened over generations, precise enough to pull one specific vitamin out of a world with no plants. One explorer was so convinced he lived on an Arctic-style meat diet for years to prove the point, and stayed healthy the whole time. And here is that thread again, sharper now. Outsiders showed up, believing their salted, civilized rations were a step above a primitive diet of raw meat. That belief killed them. The people they looked down on had already solved the problem, completely. The knowledge existed. The dying was optional. It came from refusing to learn, stay in the cold, but move up into the mountains, because the Andes produced a piece of food technology that sounds like it belongs to a space agency. High in the peaks, night after night, the temperature drops well below freezing, and the days turn bright and dry. Andean people learned to turn that swing into a machine. They would spread potatoes out to freeze solid in the night. Then, as the tubers thawed under the sun, walk over them, pressing the water out by foot, and repeat the cycle for days. What you get at the end is chuño, a potato with the moisture driven out of it, light, hard, and nearly immortal. Stored properly, it lasts for years. Some accounts stretch that to a decade. Read that back. This is freeze-drying, the same basic method behind the instant coffee in your cupboard, and the meals hauled up mountains and packed onto spacecraft, and it was running in the high Andes centuries before anyone wrote down the science of it, powered by nothing but altitude, night, frost, and sunlight. And it did more than preserve. A lot of high-altitude potatoes are bitter and mildly toxic, defended by natural chemicals, and this freeze-and-leach process strips much of that out, turning a risky tuber into safe, storable calories. An empire ran on this. Armies marched on it. When a harvest failed, the gap between a full storehouse of chuño and an empty one was the gap between a population that ate through the winter and one that starved. That's not a quaint peasant trick. That's food security engineered out of the weather itself. Which brings us to the one that ends the argument. For decades, mainstream medicine treated the world's traditional plant remedies as folklore with good marketing, a blend of placebo and wishful thinking. And to be honest, plenty of folk cures really are useless. But buried in that pile were real drugs, and one of them changed the world twice, 1,600 years apart. In 4th century China, a healer named Ge Hong wrote a compact handbook of emergency treatments, the sort of thing you'd keep within reach for when someone suddenly collapsed. In it, for the burning, cycling fevers we'd now recognize as malaria, he gave a recipe built around a plant called qinghao, sweet wormwood, and he added one odd, specific instruction: don't boil it. Soak it in cold water, wring out the juice, and drink that. Fast forward to the 20th century. Malaria is killing enormous numbers of people. The old drugs are losing their grip, and a Chinese scientist named Tu Youyou is handed the job of combing traditional texts for anything that might work. Her team screens hundreds of old recipes. Sweet wormwood flickers with promise, then disappoints. The effect maddeningly inconsistent from one batch to the next. And then she goes back and rereads that ancient line, don't boil it. She realizes the heat in her own extraction has been destroying the very compound she's chasing. She switches to a low-temperature solvent, and the P7 finally gives up its secret, a molecule It worked with a completeness that stunned the room. In the animal tests, it cleared the parasite outright. Two colleagues took it themselves before giving it to a single patient, the oldest rule in the book: try it on your own body first. And it went on to become the backbone of malaria treatment across the planet. The frontline therapy the World Health Organization recommends, paired with a second drug and credited with saving millions of lives. In 2015, 2UU stood on a stage in Stockholm and accepted the Nobel Prize in Medicine. The discovery that earned it was not invented from nothing. It was recovered from a fever remedy a Taoist healer had written down while the Roman Empire was still standing. The most advanced anti-malaria drug we have is, at its root, a piece of ancient advice that was very nearly lost because modern hands kept boiling it. Line these up and a pattern stares back at you. Insects that hold a wound shut. A jar of honey that beats a hospital superbug. Fresh organs that hold off the killer of navies. Frost and sunlight turned into food that outlasts a decade. A weed that becomes a Nobel Prize. None of the people who worked these out had the theory behind them. They knew nothing about enzymes, or vitamin C, or the strange oxygen bridge inside that malaria molecule, or that bacteria existed at all. They had attention, patience, and a willingness to try strange things and remember what didn't kill them. And every single time, the same expensive mistake shows up on the other side of the story. Someone arrived later with metal tools and universities and an easy certainty that anything older than them was backward. They looked at this hard-won knowledge and threw it out. Then the sailors got scurvy. Then the fever drug had to be rediscovered from a book that had held the answer for over 1,000 years. Then the wound dressing had to be reinvented and stamped by a federal agency before anyone would trust it again. The word primitive did an enormous amount of damage, and it was almost always aimed at people who had already answered the question. So the next time one of these methods sounds insane to you, wait a second before you laugh. Every one of them sounds insane, right up until the moment you're the one bleeding in the dark with no thread, or burning with fever and nothing in the cabinet, or standing over a plant you can't name, deciding whether it's dinner or the end of you. That was your ancestors' situation every single day. They didn't survive it despite being primitive. They survived it because they paid ferocious attention to a world that was trying to kill them. And they got the answers right long before anyone thought to give them credit. You are here because they did.